Elizabeth Hargrove ruled Summit Hills, an exclusive gated community with an iron fist. At 50, she had an almost mythical status, self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, enforcing her image of perfection by any means necessary. She wasn't just a stickler for rules. She was entitled, rude, and infamously racist. For her, appearances were everything. If you didn't fit her vision, life was made unbearable. The story opens with Elizabeth storming out of her pristine white mansion, her designer heels clicking angrily against the pavement. A delivery driver had dared to step onto her immaculate lawn, delivering a package to a neighbor. "You people have no respect," she hissed, folding her arms. "That grass is worth more than your entire paycheck." The young man stammered an apology, but it wasn't enough. Elizabeth snapped a picture of his ID badge with her phone. "This is going straight to your employer. Don't be surprised if you're looking for a new job tomorrow." Satisfied with her power, she turned toward her house, only to freeze when she saw her new neighbor, Edward Carter. Edward, a retired military vet and former detective, was tending to his plants, a black man in Summit Hills. Elizabeth's gaze hardened in disgust. He was far too relaxed in her perfect neighborhood. "He doesn't belong here," she muttered, marching inside to file a formal complaint with the HOA. His very presence, she claimed, was a threat to property values. Edward wasn't intimidated. Having faced prejudice and injustice before, he chose to ignore her and go about his day. But Elizabeth was relentless. The next day, as Edward lounged on his back patio, catching some sun, Elizabeth's eyes narrowed from her upstairs window. A black man, shirtless and relaxed in her neighborhood. This time, she wouldn't wait. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I need to report suspicious activity. A man is in his backyard, shirtless, acting strange. It could be a drug deal." Within minutes, 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt in front of Edward's house. Hearing the commotion, he stood up. Years of military and detective experience kicked in. He saw the officers at his gate and prepared for the worst. One officer approached, speaking with caution. "Sir, we received a report about suspicious activity." Edward didn't flinch. "Suspicious? A man sunbathing in his own yard?" he asked coolly, reaching into his bag. He pulled out his old detective badge. The officer froze. A former detective? The realization dawned, and they quickly apologized, retreating from his yard. Elizabeth watched from her window, fuming. But Edward wasn't finished. He'd lived his life uncovering criminals, and Elizabeth was no exception. His instincts as a detective kicked in. Public records, property history, financial statements, all of it. Within moments, he uncovered a trail of fraud. Elizabeth had a long history of staging accidents and collecting insurance settlements. 10 years ago, she staged a fall in a department store and claimed a neck injury, resulting in a $500,000 settlement. But this wasn't a one-time scam. 5 years ago, she sued a restaurant after slipping on a wet floor, and 3 years ago, she claimed a back injury in a minor fender bender. The pattern was clear. Elizabeth was a professional scam artist. The real bombshell came when Edward uncovered a damning email. Years ago, Elizabeth had sent a vile, racist rant to the HOA board. In it, she explicitly said that black families brought crime and that the neighborhood should screen buyers more carefully. Edward clenched his jaw. This wasn't just personal. It was an ongoing campaign to keep black families out of Summit Hills. The time had come for payback. At the next HOA meeting, Elizabeth was as smug as ever, poised to introduce a new set of rules aimed at making life harder for certain homeowners. She was accustomed to the silence that fell when she spoke, her voice dripping with authority. "As many of you know, Summit Hills is a prestigious neighborhood," she began. "We need to enforce stricter guidelines to maintain our high standards." But Edward stood. He didn't need to raise his voice to silence the room. "I think we should discuss something far more serious," he said, his voice cutting through the air. With a calm motion, he pulled a thick file from his bag and laid it on the table in front of him. Elizabeth Hargrove has a long history of fraud. The room fell silent as Edward flipped through the file. She staged multiple accidents, faked injuries, and stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent claims. Elizabeth laughed nervously, but it was forced. "That's ridiculous," she stammered. "You have no proof." Edward smirked. "No proof?" He projected a video onto the screen behind him. The footage was of Elizabeth's staged fall in the department store, her dramatic collapse followed by her glancing around to make sure no one saw her faking it. The crowd gasped. Edward clicked to the next slide. Vacation photos of Elizabeth jet skiing in the Bahamas 2 months after her supposed neck injury. "Bedridden, huh?" he quipped. "Nice jet ski." The final blow came when he showed the leaked email. Her racist rant was displayed in full, with the subject line, "Keeping our neighborhood safe." The silence in the room was deafening as people processed what they had just seen. Elizabeth's mask of control shattered, and as neighbors recorded everything on their phones, Elizabeth stood, her face pale. She attempted to protest, but it was too late. "You had power," Edward said, "and now you have consequences." The room erupted into chaos. Neighbors demanded her resignation. Others whispered about pressing charges. Elizabeth bolted, humiliated, out of the meeting. Within days, her world crumbled. The insurance company launched an investigation into her fraudulent claims, freezing her bank accounts. Her disability payments were cut off. The local news outlets jumped on the story, plastering her face across screens with bold headlines: "HOA leader caught in fraud scandal," "Neighborhood tyrant exposed." Social media was even worse. Memes flooded Twitter, mocking her every move. She became an internet joke. The HOA board, once loyal to her, stripped her of her position. She was banned from ever holding another leadership role. Elizabeth's fall from grace was complete, but her problems didn't stop there. With her bank accounts frozen, her mortgage payments fell behind. She fought, filing appeals, crying in court, but nothing worked. The house she had once ruled over was soon in foreclosure. It was bought at an auction by none other than Edward. When she saw the paperwork, Elizabeth nearly collapsed. Moving trucks pulled into her driveway, but she wasn't the one packing. Edward, the man she had tormented, stepped out, holding the keys to her former kingdom. Elizabeth watched from a motel parking lot, her new reality sinking in. Her house, her status, all gone. Edward didn't gloat. He didn't rub it in. He simply went inside and made it his own. The lawn she had once tried to police was now his. He lived peacefully, free from the harassment of the HOA. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's life spiraled out of control. With no job, no family to turn to, she bounced from motel to motel. Her reputation was ruined. Every job application was met with rejection the moment employers Googled her name. She was trapped in a cycle of poverty and humiliation. One day, while working at a diner, Elizabeth overheard a group of customers laughing about her downfall. They didn't even realize she was standing there. She turned away, clenching the rag in her hand. Karma had come for her, and it wasn't done yet. Her case was featured in a true crime documentary about HOA corruption, reviving the public's scorn for her. She became a permanent cautionary tale, a symbol of the dangers of abusing power. As Elizabeth struggled to hold on to her dignity, she couldn't escape the crushing reality. Karma had claimed her, and there was no escape from her legacy.